A new caste system has emerged, one built on the foundations of mass incarceration and systemic oppression. The poor and people of color find themselves ensnared in a web of injustice, where the bars of their cells are forged from prejudice and inequality. This new order relegates millions to a permanent second-class status, stripping them of their rights, their dignity, and their hope. As the ultra-rich and powerful tighten their grip, the marginalized must navigate a society that seeks to silence their voices and erase their existence. In an excerpt from the book The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, she writes, "As a criminal, you are afforded scarcely more rights and arguably less respect than a black man living in Alabama at the height of Jim Crow. Mass incarceration functions as a powerful tool of racial control." One example is the disproportionate incarceration of African Americans in the United States. Despite comprising only 13% of the population, they make up around 40% of the prison population. The systemic issue often begins with targeted policing in minority neighborhoods, leading to higher arrest rates for minor offenses. Once convicted, these individuals face harsher sentences compared to their white counterparts. The war on drugs, for instance, disproportionately affected communities of color, escalating incarceration rates without addressing root causes like addiction. This creates cycles of poverty, limited job opportunities, and disenfranchisement, perpetuating social and economic inequality. The war on drugs, initiated in the 1970s, has had profound and often devastating effects on communities of color. Policies like mandatory minimum sentences and three strikes laws disproportionately targeted African American and Latino populations. For instance, despite similar rates of drug use across racial groups, Black individuals are nearly 6 times more likely to be incarcerated for drug offenses than their white counterparts. This has led to overcrowded prisons and the destabilization of families and communities. The war on drugs has also fueled a cycle of poverty and criminalization, making it difficult for those affected to reintegrate into society. By examining these impacts, we can see how the war on drugs has perpetuated racial disparities and systemic injustice. Once labeled a felon, individuals are burdened with legal discrimination that deeply impacts their reintegration into society. Employment becomes a major hurdle, as many companies have policies against hiring those with criminal records. Housing discrimination follows, with landlords often unwilling to rent to former inmates. Access to education is also restricted, with some schools and financial aid programs disqualifying felons. Additionally, voting rights are stripped, barring millions from participating in the democratic process. This systemic discrimination creates a permanent underclass, perpetuating cycles of poverty and disenfranchisement. For instance, in some states, nearly 1 in 4 Black men is permanently disenfranchised due to felony convictions. Colorblindness, the notion that race should not impact decisions or policies, may sound ideal, but it often masks underlying racial disparities. By ignoring race, society can overlook systemic inequalities affecting people of color. For example, in education and employment, treating everyone the same ignores the unique barriers faced by marginalized groups. Colorblind policies can maintain a racial hierarchy by perpetuating the status quo under the pretense of equality. A poignant example is the backlash against affirmative action. Opponents claim it unfairly benefits minorities, while supporters argue it's necessary to combat historical and ongoing discrimination. Through this lens, color blindness becomes a convenient way to dismiss the lived experiences of people of color. The current criminal justice system draws disturbing parallels to past forms of racial control such as slavery and Jim Crow laws. Slavery legally justified the subjugation of Black individuals, while Jim Crow laws enforced racial segregation and disenfranchisement. Today, mass incarceration perpetuates a similar control, disproportionately incarcerating people of color and perpetuating systemic inequality. This parallels the past by creating a racial caste system that restricts social, economic, and political freedoms for marginalized communities. The call to action is clear. This means reforming discriminatory policies, investing in education and community programs, and dismantling systems that perpetuate racial injustice. If you find this video informative, please like and follow.